Welcome to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. Hope you're having a great day as we approach the end of January. Can you believe it that we're approaching the end of January? I don't know. Maybe it's the snow and the inauguration and all the lead up and all, but it's already the end. We almost have January 2025 in the books. Can you believe that? I mean, it's hard for me to get my head around that. Listen, I've had a string of terrific shows over the past week. I just want to kind of zero your attention in a little bit. Austin Summerall from White Pillars joined me to talk about that, about the latest at his restaurant in Biloxi and also his restaurant in Gulfport. And we talked a little bit about why it's important to have integrity in seafood. And we just talked just in general. It's always good to catch up with Austin. You know, if you look at the concept that he has where it's farm to table and the work that they have to do to maintain that, it's very impressive. And they don't have a set menu, so they're focused on making changes every single day based on what's available. And it's just really cool to spend time with Austin. We also talked about his unique approach to king cakes, and I think you'll enjoy that. I had Richard Cross come in and join me, and we spent an entire show looking back at Paul Gallo's career, and with the sad passing of our colleague Paul Gallo. There's so much to look back on. A career. And nearly 55 years in broadcasting. It's really kind of hard to even get your head around those kind of numbers. And, of course, been with SuperTalk since 1990. And what he helped Steve Davenport do to build this statewide force, I just can't tell you how important his contribution was. And his legacy will live on in SuperTalk for many, many, many years to come. And I mentioned to Cal yesterday that sadly, his passing comes amidst the inauguration and, again, the snow. And people haven't had the opportunity to reflect, although if you go and look on social media, the amount of interaction with posts around the announcement of Paul's death and the celebration of his legacy, et cetera, the tremendous interaction because he touched so many people across the state. I know I've gotten so many notes from people just distraught over the fact that Paul's voice, that incredibly unique voice, that Rush Limbaugh Mississippi voice, won't be on the radio anymore. So if you missed that conversation with Richard Cross, you can go to SuperTalk Mississippi, SuperTalk Gulf Coast, or to the Ricky Matthews page. Go to your favorite podcast and just do a search for Ricky Matthews Show. You can get it that way. Or you can go to YouTube as well to SuperTalk Mississippi. We try to be there, however, whenever you want to engage in the show. But radio is always king. That is for sure, as we are always quick to point out. So now let's shift gears and move over to my friend Hunter Dawkins. He's a SuperTalk contributor. He's the publisher and owner and CEO of the Gazebo Gazette here in Coastal Mississippi, and a regular on the show. Although he hasn't been on the show in a while, so it's good to see his face and to have him back on. Hunter, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Obviously, Ricky. The winter has come upon us. As the old Game of Thrones thing, the winter is coming. The winter has come upon us, and so a lot of snow and a lot of things as such. And I agree with you, Ricky, about Paul Gallo. Paul Gallo was a very good friend of my mother's, and they of course spoke on different political platforms and sides of the aisle, but he respected my mother and she respected the heck out of him, and she of course loved to be on the show a few times here and there with Paul. And so and I of course very much appreciated the work that Paul and JT and those guys have done. So
well, he was clearly a giant in Mississippi. And what's interesting to me is when people criticize SuperTalk for its conservative-leaning shows like Gerard's show or Paul's show. Now I think we'll see where they go from here. But Richard Cross continues to sit in that seat. But if you think about those shows, there are a lot of shows that are not like that. I mean, they're not. My show's not. I mean, I make my political views known. I am somewhere in the middle. I lean right. And that's my politics. But this is not a political show. We'll talk to a wide range of people. But when people criticize, for example, when they did criticize Paul, they didn't. It was clear that they were only What they were really doing is criticizing SuperTalk for being conservative. Because if they were criticizing Paul because Paul wasn't open to different points of view, then they didn't listen to the show. I mean, he would regularly bring people on. I think J.T. Mitchell, the news director, you know so well, you work with him very regularly. But J.T. Mitchell from SuperTalk said on a special tribute show with Richard Cross that when House Minority Leader from the Mississippi Legislature, Robert Johnson's on, and he's a Democrat, and they don't agree on most things, and they may debate big time about things, but when it's all said and done, Robert always looked over at Paul and said, "But I still like you, my friend. I still like you."
And that's the same way my mother was when she was in the state legislature. She and Paul never agreed on policy positions or this, that, or the other. But they respected each other because, as you said before, she would usually do her homework on cases and scenarios. And, Paul did as well. And so they would have a great deliberation and debate and discussion. And as well, when I was on Paul's show a few times too, I had different discussions with him, not necessarily because of my point of view, but just different, the different advocacy, things like that I would point out. And it was discussion. And that was one of the greatest things about Paul was that he brought the discussion to the table, which is so much needed now in today's society. So.
No, I tell you another example is the mayor of Vicksburg, George Flaggs, was a regular on his show, a regular. And I mean, there are others as well, but again, he made his list. Here's the thing. You never had to wonder what Paul was thinking. He was going to tell you what he was thinking.
Sure.
Bottom line, you agree with him or not, he's going to tell you what he was thinking. But that didn't mean he didn't want to know what you were thinking. So, that C Spire's text line was alive and well, and he would take the input and share it. And he would invite people on that he knew was going to disagree with him, and they would debate it out in a respectful way. But I mean, that's important that you're able to do that. I mean, at the end of the day, he's a radio personality. He had listeners that relied on him, and maybe it was they listened in their car on the way to take their kids to school, or they listened on their way to work, or they listened while they were getting ready in the morning, or they listened from their offices, or when they were off, they just queued it up and listened. But he had listeners from all over the state, man. He's touching people and explaining to them what was going on in Mississippi. And one other point that I'll make, and I thought I shared this one the other day, but I thought this is a really good point, actually. Bill Cork, who, as you know, was head of economic development for the Hancock County Harbor and Harbor and Airport? Port and Harbor,
yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
My mind went blank on that. But, he had been on the show many times, and we talk about economic development for Mississippi and Hancock County in particular. But now he's head of the Mississippi Development Authority. But here's the point that he made, and I thought this is a really good one. When I came to Mississippi nearly 9 years ago, I was advised to listen to Paul every morning. He taught me so much about this state and movers and shakers that made the state alive. It was an honor to eventually make it on his show several times, to get his text messages at various hours of the day to help him learn about what was happening in our state and so on. He goes on from there. But that's a really good point. If someone was new and wanted to understand what was happening, there was no better way to do it than tune into SuperTalk and listen to Paul. Now, certainly they can still do that with Richard and Gerard and others. But that's the commitment that Steve Davenport made. He wanted to be able to connect Mississippians with issues that were important to Mississippi. And Paul lived that out every single day, didn't he?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know that the SuperTalk family in general is obviously going to be at a loss for a little while, but I will say Richard's been doing a great job in trying to emulate a lot of the things that Paul, was definitely well known for. So.
Well, thank you. I think that we have, he helped build this statewide network that's not just a radio network, but it's also in podcast platform. It's also in video platform. It's also at SuperTalk TV.
In news, yeah.
And the news effort is dynamic. I mean, think of what JT and that team have built, and it's independent of the shows. It's a true objective news effort that's getting statewide news. We talk about it every Friday, so if people have not had the opportunity to go to supertalk.fm or to download the SuperTalk Mississippi app, you ought to do it, because this news, what's great about it, and you know how important this is, with nearly 50 radio stations that are part of the SuperTalk network, when there's a news tip in every corner of this state, that's where he gets his news tips from, the local stations that are on the ground in these communities.
Absolutely.
How better way to have, what a great network of news tippers to help us understand what we need to be paying attention to. So when you go to supertalk.fm or go to the SuperTalk app, you get to see the news that's probably relevant to you that's happening across the state of Mississippi. I'll give you a chance to respond to that when we get on the other side, but we're visiting now with my friend Hunter Dawkins from the Gazebo Gazette and a SuperTalk contributor. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. We're spending some time with my friend Hunter Dawkins, who's the publisher and CEO of the Gazebo Gazette here in coastal Mississippi. Just one quick point, and give you a chance to respond. But imagine if you were trying to make the Gazebo Gazette sort of a statewide effort, and you had the ability to tap into nearly 50 other news outlets across the state of Mississippi. What a competitive advantage to your statewide effort.
Yeah, you're certainly right. But, then again, Ricky, I'm not really sure how that happened with Steve and Paul putting that together, because, the amount of people, the amount of personalities, the amount of employees and stuff that I just have, a tough time with myself. And I know you did, being in management position. It's interesting how that works out.
Yeah, it is. It is, man. You know how it works? I can tell you how it worked with me with over 2,000 employees in my last job, and watching Steve and them is having great general managers on the ground in these communities. Right. And that's the way. And in fact, they just made announcements this past week on 3 additional new general managers at radio stations across the state, and that's the key, man. You got a good feet on the ground. Serving the communities, and that's super important to them. Speaking of serving the community, I'm looking behind you. I always happen to notice on your wall all the awards, so many awards. Every year you kind of rack up a little bit more. The wall gets fuller. Look at that.
Yeah, that wall does get pretty full, but it's at least I'm trying to put it out there like that. So,
well, I tell you what. The ultimate reward is that your community is served by your efforts. And
that's right.
You know that better than anybody.
Yeah. And Ricky, as I told one of my employees last week, I said, the most important award to me that I've ever gotten, and I'm of course not about, we don't do this job for awards or money or anything as such, but is the community service award that I got a couple of years ago. That really was a dominant factor for me, because that, even though that award means that I pretty much had to work, 100 hours a week to be able to do that, it's a rewarding factor, because that's, as you know, from the peers of associations across the United States. And that's an important factor to me. So.
It is so important. I mean, it's great to be recognized by your peers, no doubt. But yeah, if I look back, and I've had the opportunity to be part of some incredible teams, some unbelievable awards for those teams. For example, the Sun Herald after Hurricane Katrina, the gold medal for public service. I mean, it doesn't get any higher than that. And certainly I'm proud of that, because it meant a team effort and what we had to do to burn the midnight oil to do that. But then, just me personally, I think back at, anything that involved volunteerism, that's the thing that I'm most proud of. I mean, I got a presidential volunteerism award, and was able to, had the opportunity to get the Pat Santucci Award for coastal Mississippi. Those matter to me, because it meant the time in the community was recognized. And you burn a lot of time in the community. Once you commit, you don't do it for the recognition, but sure. When you do get recognized for it, it then holds you up as an example. Hopefully others will follow, because we never can have enough people who are willing to get into the community and work hard. I mean, you say this all the time, don't you?
Absolutely. And that's, it means just as much to me these awards as it means to somebody coming up to me and saying thank you for this feature story and something I wrote about their kids or their grandparents or something as such. That's an important factor for me, just as everything else is. So.
Listen, I don't know how you do it. Because, see, I happen to know what it takes to run a newspaper, especially a community newspaper. Kind of a one-man show in a lot of respects. But you got to publish a printed newspaper. You got to get it online, the news, the advertising. But then on top of that, man, you're paying attention to the big sports stories that are coming out of New Orleans. You're covering Southern Miss. You're paying attention to high school sports. I don't know how you do it. I know I say that to you just about every time we're on the show, but when do you rest?
Yeah, well, I heard a movie line the other day that, you rest when you're 6 feet under, but, that's of course is a little bit of a funny scenario. But at the same bit, Ricky, I really think the more that you're devoted to your community, and of course me in Harrison County, I think that the more relations that I make across the board with not only with sports, with athletes, with schools, and at board meetings. One of the things that you and I talked about about a year ago was going to these board meetings and different city council, school district meetings. You get a lot of business there. You get advertisement from there, but you also get stories about different things going on in the community, and that really helps facilitate your idea with the community. So,
listen, I happen to believe too that your traumatic accident and the resulting damage it did on your body and what it took for you to come back from that made you more hungry to get everything out of this moment that you possibly can. When you go through something like that, and you can remind people who've not heard us talk before what you went through, but when you go through something like that, it does give you more awareness for we cannot control tomorrow. We can only control this moment, and we might as well make the best of it.
Well, and your point of mortality, you really recognize your point of mortality. And, luckily for me, that I was such a really young kid at that time, even though I just graduated college, when I was in a traumatic brain injury accident. My last week of college graduation week, I was in Washington, D.C., where I went to the Catholic University of America, and I was in a severe automobile accident, and pretty much my brain was thrown out. I always tell people I've got half the brain left, and just depending on what side works in, I'm blind in my left eye and deaf in my right ear. But that being said, with all those different deficiencies and things as such, you have to be able to move forward. And from the day that I really got up, I really tried to start making the connection again. I had to grow up again. When you go through that TBI, you have to be able to start from ground up. And it was very hard on my parents to see that. And, then a year later, after I had finished rehabilitation and worked at the Department of Justice in Mississippi, just doing a little bit of a PR work, I went back up to Washington, D.C., got my graduate degree, got my master's from George Washington. And it's just trying to keep moving forward with that. It like you said, it makes you hungry. It makes you more, devoted to where you're going and what you're going to do, because you recognize the mortality of things. So.
Yeah, it had to have been. So your mother, Deborah Dawkins, had been a senator and been so active in the community, so passionate about certain issues. Your dad, a very respected doctor in Coastal Mississippi. They came from a place where they want to work to control their situation, and they had no control over the situation with you. It had to have been so difficult, but they had to be proud of how you fought through that and where you are today. It's an incredible story, Hunter.
Well, and of course, Ricky, the creation of my ability to buy this paper was set on not only of having the ability to do that, but going into advertising, going into different things that I didn't know and I didn't understand. if they had not helped set the foundation, for building relationships with the local community, I would have gone from nowhere to where I'm at right now. And that's what makes me really happy and, more or less trying to build the future.
Yeah, it's really cool what you've done, but it helps you. Again, you said it best. I mean, when you come to grips, you have to face your mortality, in the face. It's a reminder of how short life is and how at any moment everything could change. And so why not just love the moment? Why not do everything you can now to leave a legacy? And as George said, whether your name's attached to it or not, the legacy you lead is that we continue to do the things that you advocated for that will make this a better place to live, work, and play. And that's what you're really kind of dedicated to, isn't it?
Absolutely. 100%, trying to make sure the community understands that's what I'll do. I'm an information provider, whether it be online, whether it be digital or print or anything as such. I try to provide that opportunity for not only for cities, but for people in general, just for local people, just to be able to help get knowledge of what's happening.
Well, listen, we're visiting with Hunter Dawkins from the Gazebo Gazette. When we come back, we'll get the latest on his thoughts about, because he watches it closely, the Saints, something that Kyle and I talked about yesterday. And Southern Miss, too. Southern Miss football team struggled, but, some of the other sports programs have done well over the years. We'll get an update from him on how they're doing these days. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. We have Hunter Dawkins from the Gazebo Gazette with us today. This is a newspaper he owns, and he's a contributor to SuperTalk as well, both as a columnist and news. And he actually does color for Gulfport High. And so he's a jack of all trades. He also covers the Saints, the Pelicans to some extent, certainly Southern Miss. I don't know how he does what he does. So let's come back to the point I made about the Saints yesterday is that the more I read, and of course, I have the opportunity to spend time with Jeff Duncan here on the show every Friday. I don't get a warm and fuzzy that even if we get our head coach, that we're going to have a Washington Commander kind of turnaround. I mean, it's going to take a few years. But what's your current thinking?
Well, as you know, Ricky, I'm not as close with the team as Jeff is, so I have to kind of let you give the information to what he gets. But at the same level, I know what they're looking for as far as head coach, but I'm not sure if that's what they're going to get. And I have, just like Jeff, I have quite a number of friends that are, work in the media and also with the organization. Not as many as Jeff, but as far as a few people. And I've gotten some word that it's more than likely going to be Aaron Glenn's job to lose, but I'm not sure necessarily if that's what the Saints want and if that's what they need right now, or if they do get Aaron Glenn, what kind of plan is he going to bring in? Is he going to just keep the same coaches? Is he going to totally restructure the team? As you know, Ricky, and I've pointed this out to you, and I'm not necessarily sure the Saints organization is 100% happy with me and what I've said, but I'm all about cleaning house, because I think that's, if you take on the idea of building yourself as a team, as Tom Benson did when he brought in Sean Payton and Mickey and all that group together, started off, look at the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans were in the same scenario 2 years ago. I mean, and now they're not necessarily a great example from a playoff level team, but at least they're making the playoffs. At least they're building their foundation on a team that is trying to get somewhere, and they're not in a sort of purgatory, is what you would think, and I know you would agree with that to some extent. So what are we looking for? And I'm not saying we got to get rid of Mickey, we got to get rid of Lauscha, I'm just trying to figure out we have to have the Saints organization has to have a plan on what's going to happen. It can't just be, okay, well, we didn't want to fire Dennis Allen, as Dennis Allen had indicated in the statement, that Mickey didn't necessarily want to fire him, but he had to because of the scenario. Okay, well, that's not necessarily acceptable. Where are we going from here and from now? And I think, Jeff, that's something that he's looked into, and I think that he's probably going to comment to you on that later on. So.
Yeah, what's going to be interesting is, well, first of all, one of the reasons why Aaron Glenn's name is in the mix is because the Saints organization has history with him. They know him.
Exactly.
Mike McCarthy's name might be in the mix. And again, the reason why is the Saints have history with Mike McCarthy. They know him. That tends to be the way they do things. They want the familiar. They don't necessarily want to grab the unfamiliar. That's why we got Dennis Allen. Okay, I think Kubiak hiring, remains to be seen whether he's the guy or not. But the Kubiak's hiring was a little bit out there for them.
Well, and it's the same thing, Ricky. I don't really think Clint got that much of an opportunity to really showcase what he wanted to do. First two games, you would have thought we were a Super Bowl contender. But then with injuries, with, just a few situations being out of stake or something that we couldn't control, then that's just something that the organization is trying to fall back on. And, it's just not – and like I told you before on one of the previous shows, I think back in October, Sean Payton's coming in for Denver and pretty much whooping our butt. That should have told us a lot of things about the organization and what the Saints need to do from here on out.
Yeah, not that they didn't know that already, because they knew.
I agree.
They knew what Sean.
I would agree, Ricky. But
here's the issue.
That was the more telling factor.
I think you're right, and I think on top of that is the learning that Sean, in such a short period of time, can go to a place like Denver, make the decisions he had to make around Russell Wilson and Bo Nix, et cetera, and as definitive a way as he did, unbelievable.
He cleaned house, and that's something that I think that needs to happen. And whether you're going to get McCarthy or Aaron Glenn, or whether they're going to bring back Rizzi, which I don't see that as likely, but that's a possible scenario.
Yeah,
there needs to be some cleaning house. So
I don't see Rizzi. I don't see Rizzi as a possibility, and the reason why I don't is because I think he's done a great job of filling in, no doubt about it. But
sure.
But I got about the third or fourth game, some of his approaches to the locker room and some of that,
sure.
You're already beginning to see players being a little disgruntled with some of the things he was doing.
And again, Ricky, the players understand he's not a head. They understood that Cameron Jordan told on this podcast or so. They understood that he was not a head coach material. And I think to a certain point, Dan Rizzi understands that.
Yeah.
But at the same level, that's the platform you got put in.
No, you're right, and I think he did a fine job given what he had to deal with. And we can talk about injuries all day long, and people can push back on all teams have injuries, et cetera.
Sure.
But for the Saints, it was an incredible number. I mean, all of our stars, every major star on our team on the offensive side of the ball got wiped out. I mean, that's just a fact. And then because we had salary cap issues, we didn't really have the bench strength in place to be able to fill those gaps. It just was a problem.
It's the same thing, Ricky. Isn't that a point of maybe possibly cleaning house? Not only dealing with the salary cap, but dealing with people that, doctors and trainers and things as such that can facilitate a different platform. This is something that I think the Saints organization needs to look into, bringing in new people that can, do different style of training and strength training and things as such. Something has got to happen to go from point A to point B. So. Yeah,
you remember, I meant to ask Jeff about this, but didn't they replace the strength coach a couple of years ago? And the reason why they did that was because of the soft tissue injuries. Now, when Mickey Loomis talks about it, he's not necessarily just talking about the strength coach. He's talking about the medical doctors, the whole organization that's focused on keeping these guys healthy. It needs to be looked at. And another bit of irony to this whole thing is that one of the things that Sean Payton put in place to reduce injuries worked. And it's one of the things he pointed to. So much of what the Saints are having trouble with now, Sean Payton is literally in the moment correcting in Denver. It's amazing.
Well, there are certain things that the Saints organization also needs to hold on to. Now, not necessarily the players or format or certain level of play or coaches or anything as such, but they need to be able to hang on to somebody like Alvin Kamara, which they hung on to with signing a contract extension. They need to find a way to bring Taysom Hill back. Yeah. Because and you can better believe that Sean Payton is all over that if something happens and it doesn't work out that way, because those are different levels of things. DeMario, there needs to be, ability to bring some guys like that are leadership roles. Yeah. And that's something that I think the organization needs to really look into.
Listen, I told you this story, but I'll bring it back up again because it connects to the second part of a question I want to ask you. And that is, I had the opportunity to go visit with Tom Benson, Mrs. Benson, Dennis Lashow, and Mickey Loomis. And we spent some time talking about the changes that I was leading at the Times-Picayune. And sure. Mickey made a point to me during that conversation that a lot of what the newspaper industry is going through, all this experimenting and the grasping of the reality of the digital tsunami that had overcome us, that a lot of what we were doing was, we're living in a test tube. We're testing something that hasn't been done before. And he gave incredible awareness to that and deference to that, because he pointed out what the Saints are doing, what the Saints management team is doing, leading two professional teams, a football team and an NBA team, is also something that hasn't been done before. And sure. They felt like they were in a test tube being observed. So far, not so good for that test, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. There definitely needs to be a restructuring. Unfortunately, the owner Benson passed, but I really think, as I've spoken with you before, about there needs to be some management structure from the top down. Maybe that's a part of being part of the. It's in the tube.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like Mickey's going anywhere. That's what I'm sensing. When we come back, we'll do a final segment with my friend Hunter Dawkins. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. I always enjoy spending time with Hunter Dawkins from the Gazebo Gazette. We catch up, talk about a wide range of subjects, because he's a jack of all trades, doing more than any one man in this state in the media business is doing. But how close attention are you able to pay to the Pelicans?
Well, of course, because they've not exactly had the best season of at least from any perspective. And they've, of course, had somewhat of the same as the Saints organization with injuries. It's a little distant face, but of course I pay attention to the scores and, the production and who's doing what here and there. But I'm definitely I'm a little bit concerned with what's going on.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Coming back to Southern Miss. Southern Miss, people tend to think of Southern Miss as just a football program, and my belief is still the way it's always been. We got a new head coach, and I think that's going to change things slightly. But it's still going to be hard for a team like Southern Miss to survive in this transfer portal or NIL world. I'll get the latest from you on that. But the other programs that they have, they've performed really well over the years. So what's your assessment of the sports situation at Southern Miss these days?
Well, and as I've told you before, Ricky, I think the toughest thing for USM to compete with is what's down Highway 98 to compete with South Alabama, because now South Alabama has a team now that not only South Alabama, but across in I-10, Lafayette. You're now in a conference where regions matter, and they recruit from your area. Whereas Southern Miss used to be, they would get people that would not go to LSU or people that would not go to Alabama out of Mobile and Pensacola. They had kind of just hands wide open. If they weren't going to go to an SEC school, those kids generally went to Southern Miss. That doesn't happen anymore now because not only with the transfer portal, but just with the high school kids, with junior college now being a year of free eligibility. Those platforms, that's going to make it tough for USM, especially when they don't have the facility resources yet to be able to provide opportunities for kids.
Well, look, they get a new head coach, and I like him. Listen, man, I liked him when Southern Miss played his teams. And then you had to
coach, Ricky. He's an amazing football coach.
Hey, what'd you say again?
Charles Huff. Chuck Huff, who I've met in New Orleans the last 2 years, the media days, he's recruited down here heavily, actually. And he knows the area very well. And he is by far one of it was like a diamond in the rough. I can't believe Jeremy McClain that came into it. Of course, I can't believe how Marshall did that to him, but the same level perspective. It's a golden A. Even if he doesn't go to a bowl game next year, it's still a golden hire.
Well, I had the feeling, look, of course, what happened at Marshall shouldn't have happened, but set that aside for a second. We hire him. And when you look at the transfer portal, the number of kids coming from Marshall, you have this kind of Deion Sanders kind of feeling that I'm not comparing him to Deion Sanders. I'm just simply saying, look at the number of committed, loyal players that followed him to Southern Miss. It's pretty incredible.
Absolutely, including the quarterback. I mean, the Sun Belt Offensive Player of the Year. I mean, he literally one of the best players. And not only that, the offensive lineman, defensive lineman, and then all of these SEC recruits too, who had been looking in, who had played at Marshall under him, people that have transferred all the way across the board. He's getting a lot of respect, and I think that there's going to be a great opportunity. It's a building for Jeremy McClain, and I think the reason why that Huff took that job was because of his amount of respect that Jeremy McClain has for coaches. And that follows you a long way, Ricky.
Yeah,
that's not only through the conferences, but people see that just because coaches are getting rattled here and there online, if Jeremy McClain is behind you, he's behind you. And he gave, Coach Hall probably more time than most would have.
He did.
But that being said, that's at least where Huff's getting a lot of respect for that, and because of the amount of NIL money that he was given, to be able to do not only get transfers, but then bring in coaches with him. You look at Southern Miss,
what McClain has been able to accomplish with that hire. Joe Paul, you can tell. I mean, in my meetings with Joe Paul, he was not thrilled at all where the program was headed.
Sure.
But it's a big win for Southern Miss, and I think it's going to be a better year next year. Right off the bat, it's going to be a better year. And if you have a better year, you can have a better recruiting year. And maybe they can play in that sub-tier world in a way. I mean, because you got to bring other stuff. You got to have great facilities. You already brought that up. You got to have a great coach. You have to have support of the program, and you got to have at least somewhat of a winner. And then you will attract people to come play for you. But that's what it takes to win today.
Well, and it's going to be hard to go from one win to bowl eligible, but it's a step in the right direction, Rick.
It is, man. It is. Hey, next time we're together, we'll update on the other programs. We're just out of time for today. But it's always a dynamic conversation. Thank you for spending some time with me, Hunter.
Ricky, it's always a privilege and an honor, and thank you very much and all the work you and Kyle do.
Thank you, man. This has been Hunter Dawkins from the Gazebo Gazette. Look it up. You'll be glad you did. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.